Thanks so much for joining us again, Caitlin.
Thank you for having me again. It's such a pleasure to get to come on not only one, but two times. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, your first episode I thoroughly enjoyed, and I heard from a lot of listeners that they enjoyed it as well. You've got such a range of knowledge within combo, but within psychedelics as a whole. And so I was really excited for you when I saw this article come out and get passed around the social media. And I was like, nice. Not only do we have an article, but I get another reason to ask Caitlin back on the show. So very excited to have you. Today we're going to be talking about the things you covered in your paper, which is a discussion about how psychedelics may be able to intervene in some of these autoimmune disorders that are on the rise in our population. So if you could tell us a little bit about, for those especially who haven't heard the first episode, P.S. Go back and listen to it. We talked all about combo. But if you could tell a little bit about your background and what led you to go this direction and do this literature review that you put out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have struggled with a chronic autoimmune related illness for pretty much my entire life. And while I don't currently identify as being chronically ill, I still do sort of battle autoimmune tendencies in my body. And it's really my own personal experience with autoimmunity that inspired me to dive down the rabbit hole on the science of the immune system and why autoimmune conditions develop. And, I really was selfishly motivated to heal myself and have a good quality of life. But luckily, I have a background in biology, so I have like the tools and the language to actually be able to read scientific literature and understand things on a more nitty-gritty level than probably the average person. So I was in this wonderful position where I could really empower myself by reading the scientific literature and sort of piecing together the different facets of autoimmune condition. And then, of course, I did my own field research, which is how I sort of came to the conclusion that, hey, psychedelics might, be doing something really interesting here. And the more I explored and the more I dove into the scientific literature, the more I found that there was actually a lot of really fascinating evidence and conclusions that one could potentially draw from connecting different assumptions about the immune system, psychedelics, and the effects that they have on our physiology.
Well, I'm really excited to dive into this with you. So the article had come out. It was a literature review that came out in Immunology Letters, and very helpful and we'll put a link to this in the show notes, but helpful for all the readers who may not be as scientifically minded. You have put the 5 highlights at the beginning of the article, and I would love to go over those with you. And because the first episode we did was on combo, and I know we talked a little bit in that episode about how combo may positively affect the immune system, but this, as I understand it, is broader, because I don't even see combo mentioned here in the beginning highlights. This is talking about psychedelics as a whole, correct? Like the
Yeah,
category. Yeah.
yeah, strictly psychedelics. And even though we did sort of mention things like MDMA and ketamine and even ibogaine, things that aren't considered classical psychedelics, we were specifically focusing on psychedelic compounds, which is why we don't have anything about Cambo, because we're trying to focus on the shared mechanisms of action that we could bring light to.
Got it. Okay, makes total sense. All right, the first thing that you mentioned is that these classic serotonergic psychedelic compounds display immunomodulatory properties. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it has to do with this, or I believe it has to do, after sitting through SciTech yesterday and hearing lots of scientific evidence, with this serotonin receptor, correct?
Yeah, so specifically the 5-HT2A receptor, which is definitely of a lot of interest in general to pharmacologists and scientists, because that seems to be the one that is the most important for facilitating a lot of the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics. But specifically, we see that receptor as being crucial for actually dictating whether an anti-inflammatory or immune modulating effect is seen in some sort of scientific experiment when a subject is treated with LSD, or sorry, other psychedelics like psilocybin, DMT, kind of the whole gamut. But also serotonin on its own is highly immune modulatory. And what's actually really fascinating is how important serotonin is for regulating all sorts of processes that are related to immune function. And it's actually really fascinating because the same receptor, such as the 5-HT2A receptor, will actually have different functions in different types of tissues and different types of cells. So you see this really large spectrum, a variety of how the serotonin signaling system can actually sort of run all these different processes, from apoptosis to cell differentiation to the innate immune system, or just other facets of the immune system and just normal cell processes like that.
Interesting. And so is it that just with interacting with that receptor can lead to an increase in anti-inflammatory molecules that the body puts out? And is that how it helps with some of the inflammation with these autoimmune diseases?
That's certainly one proposed mechanism. I mean, this is like completely in the infancy. It's like we are just starting to explore in rats, like, oh, this psychedelic seems to produce a lower amount of these pro-inflammatory cytokine molecules and perhaps increase the amount of anti-inflammatory cytokine molecules. And then in some studies, they'll, do like they'll give a 5-HT2A antagonist drug to block that receptor from binding to the psychedelic, and then they won't see the same results in these cytokine reductions. So they're just starting to piece together that, this receptor is probably implicated in, the change in the cytokines. But at the end of the day, it's like so incredibly complex, and we have just started to draw back the curtain and peek into this vast world that has more questions than answers.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great segue into something that I should have mentioned before even diving into highlights, which is that the paper you put out is a literature review, and there are essentially a lot of proposed mechanisms in here, like you said, things that need further investigation, as opposed to we know that psychedelics do this. It's a lot of areas of where psychedelics, by their mechanism and by how the immune system works, should, in theory, interact with each other, correct?
Yeah, it was very much a connect the dots sort of affair, and by no means is this any sort of scientific conclusion that we can use these things for treating autoimmune conditions, but really they're meant to be pieces of evidence that form a potential picture that can inspire other research.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Now, when we get to the next highlight here, I think this is one that so many people are going to say, like, obviously, it doesn't take very much scientific knowledge to know that psychosocial stress may contribute to the development of autoimmune diseases, because many of us feel, okay, we know that psychosocial stress can decrease our immune system and lead to illness and that kind of thing. So it would naturally follow that it can lead to these autoimmune disorders. Can you talk a little bit about how psychedelics may interact at that level?
Absolutely. And like you said, it's like pretty intuitive for most people that of course, stress or trauma can compromise a person and make them less healthy. But sometimes it's not always obvious like how exactly that happens. But there is very real scientific explanations for the way that stress can influence our physical health. For example, when you have chronic stress, there are real measurable downstream consequences in the body. The HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which is important for regulating our stress response, that has a number of implications when it's in a dysfunctional state. For example, it affects our digestion, which is going to influence how well we extract nutrients from our food, which is going to influence all sorts of different things that our cells are doing, or our mood, our neurotransmitter production, etc. It influences our immune systems, like you said. And if you're running in a chronically deficient immune system for a while, then you're going to be a sitting duck for infectious organisms or bacterial overgrowths to happen. That's where we see like Candida overgrowth or H. pylori overgrowths, or things like Epstein-Barr virus or even Lyme disease. I see that Lyme disease is usually not so much about the presence of Borrelia burgdorferi bacteria, but more about an immune system in an individual that's compromised, and that opportunistic organisms have moved into a space that wasn't being really defended very well by the immune system.
That makes total sense. Well, thank you for that explanation. And so essentially, if we can get healing of our stress, of our maybe mental distress, some level of healing through psychedelics, we can get that HPA axis back on our side and hopefully not only, like you said, quell inflammation that may be happening, but have an immune system that's better able to fight off new invaders.
Yeah, and I always make the analogy that an autoimmune illness or a chronic illness of that type, it's often like you have a faucet in a bathroom that's turned on, just running, running, running until the sink overflows. There's water pouring all over the floor. And sometimes, some of these treatments where we're just trying to reduce the inflammation or even target the bacterial infections. It's kind of like taking buckets and trying to empty out the water when the faucet is still running. And so I see psychedelics and other modalities, when we use them to try to resolve the initial seed, which is usually trauma or chronic stress of some sort, then we finally turn off the faucet, and then we can take our buckets of water and start cleaning up the mess. But it's a bit useless to go through all these treatments, to have this pristine diet, to take all these supplements, if you're not also approaching the core thing that compromised the person in the first place.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I like that analogy very much, or metaphor, or whatever thing that is. I like that. I like that picture in my head. The next on the highlight is one of my favorite areas that I hope is going to be overflowing with upcoming research because I think it's really important. And you highlighted it here, which is the gut microbiota modulates physiological pathways involved in stress. And I think the interaction of psychedelics and the gut microbiome is an area that a lot of people have been talking about, and I'm dying to see some research in that area. So if you could talk a little bit about that interaction.
Yeah, so that is very hypothetical. But what we do know is that serotonin, the neurotransmitter, definitely has an influence on endogenous gut bacteria. And we see that there's certain gut microbes that when treated with serotonin will actually increase in numbers and change their colonizing behavior. And they do have transport proteins that are somewhat homologous to our cells' serotonin transport proteins, which suggests that these bacteria are able to take serotonin and shuttle it across their membrane into their cell. Also, a lot of gut bacteria produce serotonin as a metabolic byproduct. It's been unclear at this point, until recently, whether serotonin was actually just a metabolic waste product or if it was actually a signaling molecule that served some sort of function for bacteria to communicate with one another or whatever. So now there is some evidence that it's actually more of a molecule that the bacteria are secreting for the sake of communicating with other bacteria or somehow giving themselves some sort of advantage to proliferate and survive in an environment. So what that means, because we have these psychedelic analogs that are virtually like so close to being identical to serotonin, and we know that they bind to serotonin receptors. So they are close enough to serotonin that they trick our bodies and bind to the receptors. It's highly likely that a bacteria would have the ability to take in a psychedelic serotonin analog, such as psilocybin or DMT, or I guess psilocin technically, etc., into the cell, and that may offer bacteria either some sort of advantage or disadvantage. And that's where we really just have no idea, because we barely even understand how bacteria interact with serotonin. But to me, the whole idea is fascinating of like, what will my bacteria in my gut do when they're on LSD? Like, totally bizarre when you think about it, you know?
It is, but I also think that it may harken back to the highlight we talked about before, dealing with the psychosocial stress, because we know how stress can also, like you said, negatively affect the gut microbiome. You know, if you are, stress is causing a decrease of your immune system, and then, like you said, H. pylori overgrows or something else in the gut that isn't supposed to be there, then it seems to me like those two areas that psychedelics may affect interact even on that level as well through the stress response.
Yes, and even more so because the HPA axis is directly correlated with the vagal nerve, which innervates through the entire digestive tract, which can influence the environment of the gut, of the stomach, of the intestines, which can also dictate what sort of organisms live there. So it's really this very involved feedback from many different angles between the microbiota, our nervous systems, and our immune systems.
Wow, this is so much to think about in so many areas of research. Dear researchers listening, please please
Right?
pick up one of these areas of research. Okay, and we're not even done. All right. That's hilarious. I look at the next one. It says modulation of the gut microbiome by psychedelics may influence immune functions. Okay, so I think we kind of covered that. Is there anything
Yeah.
left to say on that topic?
I guess I was just gonna mention you were talking about how stress can actually influence the microbiota, and definitely there's certain pathogenic bacteria like strains of E. coli that like to eat catecholamines, which are things like norepinephrine, epinephrine, which are also called adrenaline, aka stress hormones. So yeah, definitely stress has a direct effect on which microbes thrive and which ones get crowded out.
Oh, that's so interesting. E. coli can eat up like adrenaline and stress. Like it thrives on it.
Yeah,
That's it. That's a food source for it to
or at
grow.
least something about the exposure to it improves their outcome of proliferating. Maybe they don't eat
Interesting.
it, but they
Right.
do something with it.
Interesting. Okay. All right. All right. If anybody else out there was looking for another reason to try to decrease your stress today, there it is. And then here, the last highlight, you said normalization of physiological stress responses may be key in the application of psychedelics to treat autoimmune diseases. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in that one?
Well, yeah, there's the potential for psychedelics to offer really deep, meaningful, emotionally resolving experiences. So, say that you had a traumatic experience as a child, or perhaps you're a war veteran, and living in this chronic state of stress and hypervigilance and fear has caused your immune system to deteriorate and become completely dysfunctional. And then you have, say, an MDMA experience with a therapist, or perhaps you just go on a hike with friends on mushrooms and you relive your trauma and get a lot of insight and are able to process it and witness it from a different perspective where it's not quite so triggering. When people are able to actually consciously resolve and find peace with traumatic experiences, it actually completely changes how the nervous system responds not only to that experience but to other experiences, and it can totally rewire how a person moves through life. And then, of course, there's some physiological modulation happening with the serotonin agonism, with the reduction of inflammation, etc. So there's this kind of biological, spiritual, and psychological event that can happen with psychedelics that sort of addresses all the different realities of a human being, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And in, you know, I know that you have worked a lot in your work with combo with people with autoimmune conditions. And I know that combo is not necessarily the source of this, but since we're kind of titling this, well, we're titling it psychedelics for autoimmune disease, but let's give combo its due because we do cover it as one of the, you know, kind of adjacent medicines.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about, like, let's talk about what you've experienced through your work with not only your own illness, but others that you've worked with, in how combo has been able to, and again, we know that this is all essentially like theoretical because there's been no research on exactly the interaction between combo peptides and the immune system. But in general, what kinds of effects have you seen? Because I know that that's a really popular go-to treatment option for people with autoimmune conditions.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, if I was telling someone, you know, which tool would give them the most bang for their buck, it would be the combo. I've seen some damn near miracles with that substance. And because I do have a personal history of autoimmunity, I tracked a lot of people with autoimmune conditions. And, you know, these people, they have, you know, these strict diets and they've tried IV antibiotics or bee sting therapy or fasting or all sorts of crazy things. They've put themselves through the ringer and nothing moves the needle like the frog medicine. And there's even, I would say the combo is even more mysterious than psychedelics because there's substantially less research and understanding on the pharmacology of these peptides and especially how they even work together. And yeah, we kind of know some things about them individually, but there's so much more we could learn. And I don't think know very much at all about the immune modulating effects of them. What we do know, and what seems to be one of the more amazing parts of combo, is the antimicrobial activity of the peptides, well, specifically dermaceptin is probably the most well-studied peptide for its antimicrobial properties. And chronic infections are a very common piece of autoimmunity and are usually, again, a symptom of someone who's been compromised for a long time. And the combo really just obliterates infectious organisms that are systemic, excuse me, because it just binds to the cell wall of these bacteria or viruses or filamentous fungi and destroys them on contact. It's actually really fascinating because it's a very unique mechanism that you don't see happening in animal cells because our cell membranes have cholesterol in them. So there's something different about the electrophysical charges of animal membranes versus bacterial and fungal and viral membranes that the peptides just obliterate on contact, which means there's virtually no possibility of antibiotic resistance because there's no survivors pretty much. So I see that as being one of the most powerful mechanisms of combo for people with autoimmunity, because sometimes you just need like a reset and it's hard to like pull your power back when a bunch of microbes have sort of taken it from you. And sometimes it's nice to just drop a bomb and kill a lot of them without compromising yourself too much. Because when you take like an antibiotic, an oral antibiotic, usually they're toxic to animal cells also, just less so. And also you take them orally, which has direct impact on your microbiome, which is often going to exacerbate your autoimmune problems. So the combo is great because it goes in through the skin, through the lymphatic system, and it bypasses the gut. So there's not like a tremendous casualty experience where you're just like destroying trillions of organisms in your gut, but rather you're reaching organisms through the bloodstream that are probably in places that they don't really need to be so much. like the organs, like the brain, like more distal tissues.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm picturing in my head kind of the 1-2 punch of combo as, like you said before, its antimicrobial benefits, and then the possible immune system supporting benefits of psychedelics, because you can kill all these things, but it helps that if your immune system is able to deal with that kind of process, right? Like there's going to be an inflammatory process of some sort when all of a sudden all the bacteria or virus or whatever is lysed in your body. And so you'd like your immune
Right.
system to be best prepared to deal with that onslaught.
Yeah, and certainly combo offers that too. It does seem to be anti-inflammatory, and it does seem to somehow open up and facilitate more appropriate detoxification, whatever that means. So, certainly combo on its own offers a lot of that also, but I think we just have less of an explanation of why. So that's why I wrote a literature review on psychedelics and not combo, because there's not really any literature to review on combo.
Got it. That makes sense. Now, do you have an upcoming area that are you going to continue to research down this area, or some other areas you plan to branch out into?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am probably going to shift my attention back to combo research at the moment, and start to put together more studies surrounding that substance, mostly because it's legal. It's easier to do real experiments and clinical trials with combo than it is Schedule 1 substances. So, I wrote a literature review. That's about as good as you can do without having an FDA, or sorry, a DEA license. So probably that's what I'll focus on for now. But yeah, I do want to continue to explore the autoimmune and immune sort of relationship with psychedelics and combo.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're out there doing this very much. For everybody who has not, again, heard Caitlin's episode she was on as the combo practitioner back in that series of episodes. Caitlin, can you tell people where they can find you? I mean, like I said, they can find the article. We'll put it in the show notes. But if you are driving, you don't have the show notes, then it's on sciencedirect.com. But where can they find you and the rest of your work?
Yeah, I have a website for my company, but you can get in touch with me through there. It's entheozen.com, entheozen. It's like the word entheogen, but with a zen. And you can find ways of getting in touch with me through that website, or on social media, on Facebook. Entheozen also has a page there. That's probably the best way to find me, honestly, is through Entheozen.
Okay, perfect. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this important work with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love talking about all this fun stuff.
Well, very cool. Well, thank you again. And for everybody else out there, until next time.